Hello and welcome to this show. This is a very special episode, a combination of the Mary Grace Show and the Dr. Shawn Baker podcast. We have teamed up today to bring you a conversation. I am Mary Grace, the owner and founder of Mary Grace Media and the host of the Mary Grace Show. And we have with us also Dr. Shawn Baker, known to many of you as the Carnivore Doctor, also a best-selling author, the co-founder of Rivero.com, and an expert in many, many areas of health and wellness. Welcome, Dr. Baker. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you today. We decided after some conversations offline that it would be a good time to continue this conversation publicly so that we could discuss so many of the things that are happening in the public health space right now with many of the changes that are coming about in the United States. So I'm going to let you take it away here, Dr. Baker. It looks like the chat is super active. We've got people tuning in from all over the world. Hello. It looks like we've got Philippines, all kinds of people. So Dr. Baker, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, yeah, thanks, Mary, for having me there. And as we talked before, I mean, obviously we are at a very historic time in the United States, and particularly with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being confirmed yesterday as the new Secretary of HHS, there is a very strong possibility that we're going to see some significant changes around healthcare and nutrition and those types of things, which is, what he was put in place to do. And as you know, I had my sort of take, my commentary on some of the things I think are quite important. I certainly think we could maybe go into the details on that. And I can see a lot of the people tuning in here. So good to see. And so, I mean, it's a time that, we've got maybe some allies in the government, maybe for the first time in, I don't know how long, maybe since my whole life. And, as I have seen, anybody can see that we're suffering as a nation with regard to chronic disease. Something has to be done. We just can't continue on the same path that we're on. And I know the critics of RFK they're many and they're numerous, and they are very concerned about what he may or may not do. At the same time, we can't just do nothing. And I think we can talk about, some of the things like the first thing I said was, we just need to get rid of the pharmaceutical advertising on TV. I mean, we're literally, I think the United States and New Zealand are the only countries in the world where that's currently allowed. And it's not so much that the consumers are being advertised to, although that's part of it, but it's really the impact that it has on everything in the media, because when they're paying all the bills, it's hard to be critical of that. And I think you see that with a lot of particularly the news agencies, where they're afraid to strongly criticize these certain pharmaceutical industries.
I agree. And it's very interesting because when I'm talking on a show, for example, just doing a podcast, sometimes people get a little irritated when you have an ad on your show, right? And I think it's kind of ironic because if you went back to legacy news, you would get about 10 minutes of content and then 15 minutes of big pharma commercials. And big pharma, big food. And I just think that's very interesting. Yesterday, when RFK Jr. Put up a post on his X after he got sworn in, he talked about chronic disease. That is something that he has been passionate about. He said that for years now, every day he wakes up and prays that he would be the one who would lead our country out of the chronic disease, especially what we're seeing with our children. And so I think we're in a pivotal time, and America is in a watershed moment to be able to make a difference, not only for the US, but I think that what we do will have an effect on especially the West, the Western Hemisphere, because so much of the chronic disease that we're seeing is manifesting also in the UK, in Europe, in Australia. So that's not the Western Hemisphere, but I guess the developed world. And so I think that's another reason it's exciting. And I see people in the chat who are from all over the world. And I think that as America gets healthy, we're going to see the long game play out, which is that the world is going to take notice. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the United States has been a leader in the world among many things. I mean, much of what we do gets exported around the world. Our dietary guidelines got exported, throughout the world for good or bad. So yeah, I think we're going to have a definite impact. I mean, we're already seeing that. We're seeing a lot of what's happening in the U.S. starting to be echoed throughout Europe and other parts of the world for sure. Definitely changes. It's not going to be isolated to the United States by any means. Now, um, some of the things that you see, like, even irrespective of this Maha things that Kennedy's gonna do, you already see the resistance popping up in the form of lawsuits. I mean, we see some of the stuff that, Trump is trying to do with Doge, and already said all of a sudden you've got lawsuit after lawsuit, and no doubt Kennedy's gonna run into the same thing. There's gonna be, you know, every kind of lawsuit you can imagine, so they're gonna try to slow down the gears of progress. I mean, these companies that have, to the tunes of hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of capital at risk are gonna throw everything they can to slow it down and stop it, prevent it. So we'll see what happens
And
over time.
it's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy that they want to stop, that they want to stop the world from getting healthier. I mean, it's like, why would they do that? Now, we know, this is a rhetorical question, but it's shocking to me. And when you see the way that people have turned on RFK Jr., even in his own party. I don't think a lot of people know this, but he actually reached out to the other political party before he reached out to Trump. And they weren't receptive or open to what he was proposing. I don't even think they took his calls. So it's an interesting landscape we're in. And I think the fact that we have a coalition, as it were, that is made up of people from really all different walks of life. This to me is a big deal, because nutrition and health and wellness really shouldn't be a partisan thing. I don't think. What do you think
No,
about
you're
that? I
well,
mean,
of course, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're all affected by health. I mean, all of us have friends, loved ones, relatives that have been touched by chronic disease. I would wager to say, unless you're a solitary individual with no family or friends, someone with chronic disease. And um, yeah, the fact that it's sad that everything has gotten politicized over the last few years. It doesn't matter. It's like, what's my team
mhm,
cheering for? Although I do think you're right. There has been more of a coalition. And I think that's, quite honestly, a lot of people would attribute the fact that Trump won to the fact that he brought RFK into his camp, and that probably brought over, maybe 10 million votes or something like that. Again, I'm not a political expert, but
mhm,
certainly you can't ignore that impact. Of course, other people say Elon Musk had this huge impact as well, which is clearly true. Um,
mhm. Yeah.
I think that, and there's so many things, I outlined some points. I think the other thing is this conflict of interest that we see, the fact that the FDA, and many people were, I wasn't aware of this until a few years ago, that, 66% of the FDA's budget for drug approval is paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. So, like, if two-thirds of your salary is dependent upon, regulating this particular product, and the product itself is paying for it, it's going to be an obvious conflict. There's going to be an obvious bias there. And the fact that you have, FDA, heads of FDA going to work for pharma, and vice versa. Scott Gottlieb, the guy who I think was at Pfizer at one point, is now, left FDA, went to Pfizer, or vice versa. I can't remember how it went, but you've got all that going on, and it's clearly, I mean, it's an obvious conflict of interest. That has to stop. I can't see how anybody would put up with that. I guess the argument was that, well, it was taking too long to approve these drugs, and we needed more money and input into that so they could do the testing. But at the same time, I'm not sure. I was thinking about this the other day. Do we need new foods? I mean, how many more new drugs do we actually need? I mean, it's just kind of like, I mean, particularly with the food
Yeah.
standpoint, do we need to create more new food? I mean, does anybody think there needs to be more new food invented? I
Yeah.
mean, God kind of gave us a lot of food to eat, if you want to look at it that way, and we don't need to invent new stuff with new ingredients, and who knows what they do to each other. I mean, I think 3 or 4 years ago, the I think USDA, or maybe FDA, I can't remember who approves of this. Cotton is now approved for human consumption. We're allowed to eat cotton now as a food additive, and they've modified it. They've done some genetic modifications to the cotton plant, so it doesn't express as much something called gossypol, which is normally toxic. And so they've removed some of that. So now we can eat cotton, and they're going to, grind it up and stick it in processed food. That was approved like 3 or 4 years ago. So we've got a crazy situation that we have to sort of pump the brakes on that and say, hey, let's stop inventing new
That's
food
crazy.
items. The push, and I think this is the other thing with the, and I talk about, how healthcare has evolved into disease management, sick care. And it's like, we're always waiting for the next drug, the next drug, the next drug, the next technological breakthrough. And yet we have more and more sick people than we've ever had. These drugs, this technology is not decreasing the amount of sick people by any stretch of the mean. I mean, we might make them live longer, and we might give them more pills and drugs to put band-aids on their symptoms, but you know, we're not creating less sick people, which is really what we should be doing.
Yeah, well, one thing that I think, too, as you get more as you get deeper into the nutrition space, it becomes obvious that, people don't have a drug deficiency, right? When you see that somebody is having issues with their heart, for example, when there's calcification, they don't have a beta blocker deficiency, right? I don't know all the drugs, but you get the idea that they actually have something metabolically wrong with them. And for example, a type 2 diabetic doesn't have a metformin deficiency. And so the idea of developing new drugs, the idea of developing new foods, I think that so much of what you're talking about can be addressed at the metabolic level. And this is where I think, like, yes, we want breakthroughs. We want to be advancing in play in areas where it can be helpful. But what about going back to the basics? Because until we became an industrialized society and we literally started feeding people industrialized food like products, we didn't have the heart disease. We didn't have the type 2 diabetes. We didn't have the obesity and the metabolic disasters that we see walking around every single day. We didn't have childhood obesity. And I think that that has to be addressed, and I do think that RFK is going to address that. But I wanted to ask you, how do you think, like, how realistic is it to think that these things are going to be not only addressed but reversed even within a generation? I mean, it seems like it took us about 20 to 30 years to get here. Like when I was growing up and I was in school, nobody was obese. It just wasn't a thing, right? Now it's hard to go out in public and not see children who are obese. So what do you think? How realistic is it to expect that this is going to be reversed in with the generation coming up?
Well, I think that, you look at, as you probably know, what is it, the food bay, Vani Hari, they
Mhm.
successfully were able to get, I guess, this red dye number 40 finally banned. It's been banned in like makeup and stuff
Yeah,
for
yeah.
decades now. And that took an enormous amount of effort. And the impact of that is going to be, honestly minimal. It's not going to make the big difference. I mean, what it's going to take is basically scaling back and minimizing all the ultra processed stuff that we have, all the ultra processed junk food, which kind of worked its way into the American diet since probably the 1970s or something like that. So we're looking at 50, 60 years of this food. And so how do you scale that back? We're not going to, I don't think we're going to get in a situation where people are going to say, we're going to ban breakfast cereal, we're going to ban candy bars. That's not going to happen. And so the
Mhm.
fact that you're still going to have people eating them is going to, you're not going to see an overnight fix for sure. Now, as I said, if we talk about make America healthy again, it depends on Americans. Americans have got to do their part and do their own personal part, do their part for their families. I think that probably it's going to take a generation to turn it around, quite honestly. I mean, we might get to where we've got to the peak and now we can start to go back down that hill. Some people will credit, these new drugs, the Ozempic, the GLP-1s for perhaps slowing some of that down, but that's obviously another Band-Aid. It's going to cause a lot of problems in a lot of people. It's not going to be an ultimate solution. So I don't know how much, like I said, there's certainly a component of libertarianism where people just said, just leave us alone. Don't mess with the markets. Let them do whatever they're going to
Mhm.
do. And, you're going to see that sort of taking place. Like for instance, cigarettes are still legal. I can
Mhm.
go to the gas station and buy cigarettes. So can anyone else. And yet through education, and I think it's kind of like that. I mean, was it C. Everett Koop back in the 70s, I think, started to really push the information that cigarettes cause cancer.
Mhm.
And then we finally agreed to limit the advertising on cigarettes. We limited the access to some degree. We increased the prices through taxation. I know a lot of people would scream, bloody murder if you say we're going to tax all the food, the junk food. So I mean, it's going to be because everyone has to eat, not everybody has to smoke. Of course, everybody doesn't have to eat, junk food and
Yeah.
candy bars. I think it's going to take a full generation. Now, RFK has, 4 years at this point, hopefully, and we'll see what happens after that. So I think if we
Mhm.
start seeing, and I think they have to take some big swings in the beginning, and they have to make some substantial change so that people will get behind it. Because if it's, and I think this guy named Vinay Prasad was talking about, if RFK is only allowed to go in there and do some paint touch up, nothing's going to happen. There's going to be minimal consequential change. If all we can succeed to do is remove red dye 40 from the
Yeah.
food supply, we've not really done anything, quite
Yeah.
honestly. I mean, we have to really, I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, like I said, in 1954, 45% of Americans smoked. It's now 13%. Right now, something like 60% of our food comes from ultra processed food. If we could get that down under 20%, that might take a decade or two. But I mean, obviously, it's worth pursuing.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the education component is huge because if you look at the food pyramid, for example, that is something that I think pretty much everybody knows what that is, right? It's hard. It would be hard to imagine that um, that people don't know or the my plate, right? And people know about carbs and they know about protein, they know about fat, at least they know that macronutrients exist. And so I feel as though if you have an organization as big as HHS and you have the CDC and you have the FDA, you have access to all kinds of marketing dollars, I think. And, in the same way that they used that really during the last 4 or 5 years to spread propaganda, um, I feel like it could be used for good, that you can use that to educate people because you're right, you can't just legislate people to do the right thing. That's not gonna help make change if you I mean, I think they tried that in places like New York. They have the soda tax, and they wanna tax people for wanting to drink a sugary drink, and I don't know how effective that is, just like a cigarette tax. If people wanna smoke cigarettes, they're gonna smoke cigarettes, I think. And so I think you have to understand that the knowledge and the understanding is gonna be the key to affecting societal change. What do you think about that? Is that
Yeah, I mean, I guarantee every single person that is watching this right now, if I asked them how far apart were you supposed to stand during COVID, all of us would say
yeah.
6 feet. That message was beaten into everybody's head. Every radio show, TV show, every single facility you ever went into had a sign: stand 6 feet apart. So it's not an issue of do we have the resources to get the information out there if we really wanted to. Now, the biggest shame during COVID was they could have said, "Hey, now would be a perfect time not to eat all this junk food." We could have messaged that. So I mean, the mechanism is there. I mean, it's just a matter of are we willing to do that? I mean, and you're absolutely right. I don't think we can tax our way out of this. I don't think we can ban our way out of this. It's going to come down to education. I think that we have to put the education apparatus in place, and I think society as a whole has to start supporting this instead of because you see these TV commercials about don't you deserve some junk food. I mean, we
Mhm.
see, and the answer is no. You deserve to be
Yeah.
healthy. You deserve not to eat that. You deserve not to injure your body through what you stick in your mouth. And so I think we just have to have enough people that are willing to do that. I mean, the honest answer when you think about how most people make decisions about what they eat, it's going to be number one, how does it taste? And number two, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
And so that's a tough battle. Now, even if we look at it, even if we were to say we're going to revise the food pyramid to something that maybe doesn't emphasize as much grain products, the USDA, again, this is another issue. The USDA's job, is to basically sell commodities. I mean, to make sure all the corn and the grain and the soy and the wheat and the the sugar and all that is distributed, and we can sell this stuff. Where does most of it go into ultra processed food? So the food, the USDA guidelines, the dietary guidelines, kind of reflect that desire. And let's just say that we come up with some new guidelines where we say, hey, we're going to get rid of ultra processed food. We're going to have fresh, healthy food as our main sort of recommendations, which is what it should be, quite honestly. Does the grocery store actually reflect that? I would say that, how do you incentivize those foods to be present and available? Because right now you walk into the grocery store, what do you see? 90% of it's in packages and bags and boxes, and it's all junk. It's literally all junk. That doesn't even match the current USDA guidelines. I mean, if you look at the grocery store and it's supposed to be, 4 or 5, servings of grain, a couple of vegetables, and, very little meat and very little fat, it still doesn't align with it. So you have to say, if you're going to make these recommendations, and you need to make that food accessible and easy for everybody, obviously cost is going to be an issue. But I mean, given that we spend nearly $5 trillion a year on healthcare, we literally could afford to feed darn near every American, at least supplement their diet with that money. 5 trillion. It was like 4.8 trillion. It's nearly 5 trillion we spend every year on healthcare, and we get. And if you look at our outcomes, they're abysmal given the money we spend. I mean, we spend double any other developed nation in the world on our health outcomes. And our life expectancy has gone down in the last 3 years. Life expectancy has gone down every year, and that's just a testament of how ineffective our healthcare system is.
Well, and I was talking to a naturopath earlier, my friend Dr. Tracy Straub, and she said that the number one claim on insurance is mental health. And I think that's worth talking about as well, because one of the things that I noticed, I actually talked about this on your show when you interviewed me, was that anxiety went down a great deal when I switched over from a sort of grain-based, plant-based diet over to the carnivore, meat-based, high-fat, meat-based diet. And I wasn't even aware of it. But during my formative years, from the age of 20 all the way, I'd say, to my 40s, I was in that fat-free world. That was the prevailing wisdom at the time. That was the recommendation, was to avoid dietary fat, especially saturated fats, and to eat so-called heart-healthy oils and fats, which we now know are highly processed industrial seed oils. And I had debilitating depression and anxiety, and I attribute it to that in part. And so now we have a society that is subsisting barely on highly processed foods, industrialized foods, and the number one insurance claim is for mental health. What do you think about that? I mean, how did you know that? Did you know that was the number one?
I think I've seen something similar to that in the
Yeah.
past. I mean, my understanding right now is something like 1 out of 4 Americans currently carries some sort of mental health diagnosis, whether it be
Wow.
depression, anxiety,
Yeah.
bipolar, ADHD, something along
Mhm.
those lines. It is ubiquitous. I mean, and that is not a recipe for a healthy society. When you think about every 4th person you meet is either medicated for some psychiatric illness or is, unmedicated for that illness. It's a real problem. And I think it's impacting obviously our kids. I mean, our kids are growing up, unprecedented levels of depression, anxiety, ADHD, autism, dysphorias of various sorts. And I think that is reflective in large part, probably to our food supply. I mean, we are not nourishing ourselves correctly. And just like every other aspect of our body, the same people that get diabetes are the same people who are going to get these mental health disorders. I mean, it's just become ubiquitous.
And one thing I think is important to note is that it's very common, but it's not normal. It's far from normal. And yet our society has largely normalized it. And that's something that I think we have to move away from that. And I think the messaging has to support that. Now, as a doctor and as the carnivore doctor, having written about this and interviewed so many people, what do you see in terms of mental health? What kinds of changes have you seen when people switch over onto a clean, meat-based, high-fat, high ketogenic diet? Have you noticed a big difference with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just interviewed another person. Almost every day I interview people that have tremendous success with this. It is one of the more common benefits that I've seen, primarily because mental health is so common. So we see common things being fixed commonly. Typically, and in fact, there now are some studies on this. There was a recent paper based on an animal-based ketogenic diet, which is essentially a carnivore diet,
Mhm.
used for both anxiety and depression. And they found that folks with anxiety tended to resolve that in about 7 weeks, and the depression took about 12 weeks. So absolutely,
Wow. Wow.
this is one of the things early on I started getting I've been doing this for almost a decade, and after about the first year, I was like, wow, there's a lot of people that are no longer depressed, and I thought and I started talking about it. And of course, everybody thought I was kind of crazy because, you can't fix your depression with diet. You got to have, you've got to go through cognitive behavioral
Yeah.
therapy and be on SSRIs and all this stuff. And the reality is, for a lot of it, it's just nutrition. It's poor
Mhm.
nutrition. Some people get depressed for no reason. They don't really have an antecedent trauma or anything. Like, they're just depressed. And it's like, well, let's take a
Yeah.
look at your lifestyle. You're not sleeping well. You're not eating stuff. You're looking at your phone 24 hours a day. You're not
Mhm.
getting outside. You're not getting sunshine. But food is a big part, a much bigger part than we've ever been told. And now, thankfully, there are folks like I'll point to like Doctors Chris Palmer, George E., the Bazooki Foundation, where they are now doing research. They're actually getting this out there. They're calling it metabolic psychiatry, where they're treating the metabolism, which the brain, just like any other organ in the body, is susceptible and responds to its inputs, and nutrition is a huge part of that.
That's exciting. Because I remember when I was in the throes of depression, and you go to therapy, you get medication, and again, it's like I realized, like, I didn't have an SSRI deficiency. I had probably most likely a nutritional deficiency, but then just the stigma of depression, it's like a cyclical thing. You feel bad, and then you start thinking about it, and then you start thinking about how bad you feel, and you feel worse, and it's just, I mean, it really is a vicious cycle. And then a lot of times when you go into the therapy, into the talk therapy, the behavioral therapy kinds of things, then I think in some cases it makes it worse because people sometimes start to look for things that aren't actually there, right? They look for trauma. They start to dig up things that didn't happen. But if you're paying somebody $125 an hour to help you find the root of your problem, maybe there's a little bit of bias there that they feel like they have to give you your money's worth. I don't know. And I'm not making light of it because it's very serious. I mean, I struggled for years. I did. But now looking back on it, I wish that I had had the knowledge that I have now, and I thought I was doing the right thing. And so I think for people listening right now, if you're in that situation where you really think you're doing the right thing, or you thought you were doing the right thing, or you think maybe I'm not praying enough, or I'm not praying the right way, or I didn't check this box, or things like that, it could well be your diet that needs an overhaul. And that's definitely something that I know, Dr. Baker will get behind is take a good look at that, before you start to go down that rabbit hole of thinking that there's no hope. It's amazing. It really is amazing when you see the differences, that this lifestyle can have. And then that brings me back to where we are as a country, as a nation. I'm trying to look ahead and see like what can we anticipate with this generation coming up, with with Gen Z, with the generation after them. How quickly do we think that things are going to change, and will we see a reversal of these types of things? I'm really hopeful.
I mean, I think it's a possibility for sure, and like you, I am more hopeful that it's a more likely possibility.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's going to be some people that get the message. Some people are going to be drug kicking and screaming because they don't want to give up some of these things.
Yeah.
One of the things that, and another one of the points I made in that little video rant I had this morning about RFK
Yeah.
on things I think need to be done. When we look at the funding for research, I mean, even the NIH, which is supposed to be an independent government body, spends the vast majority of its resources on drug development, and so I do think we need, an equal amount of money or a representative amount of money on, let's look at lifestyle as it pertains to various medical conditions. Because, like I said, I sit there, we've put together a case series on, inflammatory bowel disease and depression, anxiety, and
Mhm.
anorexia and MS and psoriasis, all these things we're putting together there. And we're getting a pretty strong signal that, hey, you can fix a lot of these things with the appropriate nutrition. Now you just need someone to fund the randomized control trial. But that gets into many, many millions of dollars. And that money's just not easy to come by. I've been
Mhm.
trying, believe me. I'm out there, darn near every day trying to get someone to help fund some of these studies. And some
You
people have
need a
stepped up,
hookup.
but
You need
well,
a
yeah,
hookup at
well, but
USAID.
well, yeah, sure. That would make sense. No, but we need like, I can't, I don't know if is it Marty Macri or Jay Bhattacharya, whoever's ahead of the NIH now. I think it's Jay.
I think it's Bhattacharya, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Marty went over to the CDC, I think. So hopefully one of those guys will say, hey, look, let's put some real teeth into funding this. I know RFK has talked about doing studies that will
Mhm.
show, if is this food product or this drug causing harm, so that we can sue these companies, which I think is
Mhm.
fine. Well,
Mhm.
we should know if something's safe or effective. This presumption that it's safe and effective based upon really limited data, and the fact that, and this is something I didn't realize this until a few years ago, the pharmaceutical companies will do their drug trials and it'll go through peer review, but the peer reviewers often won't have access to all the data. They get to hold back some of the data. They hold back the raw data and give a summary of their findings. And it's like you take that on faith that they're telling the truth.
Mhm.
And then often it comes back a few years later, you find out these guys were lying. And so I don't think we can allow that to continue to go forward. If you're going to, I mean, maybe you need to have completely, independent bodies do all the testing for these new drugs. You make a new drug, send it off and let somebody else test it, rather than you running the own trials and funding the trials. That maybe, and it may slow things down a little bit, but gosh, I mean, how many people have been harmed by these drugs that have gone on the market? Now, again, some of them certainly do have benefits. Another thing I was shocked to find out, we have this program called MedWatch, which is supposed to be this post-market surveillance for drugs as they get, because they get approved kind of provisionally
Mhm.
based on making it through the initial approval process at the FDA, and then they're supposed to be surveilled, after market. But the reality is,
Right.
the reality is only about 1% of serious adverse events are ever reported, because most physicians don't know how to do it. I didn't know about it, and I talked to ER
Yeah.
physicians, like with these new drugs, these like Ozempic like drugs, the Wegovys, Ozempics, Mounjaro, Zepbound, all these new GLP-1 drugs. Um, ER physicians are saying we're seeing patients every single day with complications, intractable vomiting, bowel obstructions, gastroparesis, pancreatitis, and I'm like, well, are you guys reporting that? No, we don't report it. So in my view, it should probably be made
Wow.
mandatory. Now, it's going to be some extra paperwork, but I mean, really, if you get a new drug to the market, maybe for the first couple of years, you have mandatory reporting. So we actually get a sense how many people are actually being harmed versus how many people is it helping. And then again, of course, if that risk balance ratio goes the wrong way, then
Mhm.
you're compelled to pull it off the market. Unfortunately, a lot of these drugs sit on the market 10 years too long before enough people die before they actually have a chance to pull them off.
But going back to what you said, I mean, how many drugs do we actually need? When you look at if somebody has the job of being a drug rep, they're a salesperson, and their job is to go and sell these doctors and nurses on the latest, greatest, patented medication. And doctors are taking the word of a salesperson, and then they're being incentivized. I mean, the whole system is crazy. I think most people understand by now how that works. The lunches, the trips, the vacations, the things like that. Even with the childhood schedule, for all of the juice that they give the kid. I'm being a little careful because we're on YouTube, but even that schedule is incentivized for pediatricians. And so, you had mentioned this in your rant, like those conflicts of interest have to go. Where would you put that in the list, in priority? Like, is that in the top three?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you cannot have regulatory agents with such conflicts. I mean, that's defeats the whole purpose of a regulatory agency. That has to be, and I think RFK has mentioned that. I'm sure he'll facilitate that. I'm hoping. I would be very
Mhm.
surprised if he doesn't do that. And the question is, well, who else is qualified to be in there other than people in the industry? I think you can figure that out. You can figure that out quite
Yeah,
easily. You don't have to have somebody that has a financial tie to a drug company to be part of our regulatory team.
sure.
Um, and a lot of things will flow downstream from that. I mean, there's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with. I mean, we should follow the science, but we have to assume the science isn't corrupted, and we should question the science continuously, because that is the very definition of science, is that it is always changing as we learn more, and it's there's a lot of nuance there. We went through a period of time where you had Dr. Fauci saying, don't question the science. I'm the science. This huge
Crazy.
act of this sort of godlike belief that I'm right and everyone else is wrong and no one else can speak
Mhm.
up. That has to change. I mean,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I think getting those conflicts of interest in there has to be a very high priority, if not one of the biggest priorities for sure. I mean, I think right now, I mean, physicians right now are at a historical all-time low as far as trust. The community trusts physicians. I think it went down some like 30% over the last 5 years. People, I think it had
I believe
historically
it.
been hovering around 70%. It's now in the 40s, which is like, that means most physicians are not trusted, which unfortunately, I think that is deservedly so, because a lot of them, they
Mhm.
just, it's, I think there's a lot of problems in healthcare, and I don't want to blame physicians entirely, because a lot of them are good people trying to do the best job and they're stuck in the system. But at the same time, failure to act, and just
Mhm.
being compliant and complicit and a little bit cowardly has kind of got you where you are. And so I think you need physicians to stand up and say enough's enough. And that's not why when I went to medical school, when I was a 16-year-old kid dreaming about going to medical school, it wasn't to be a subcontractor for big pharma. I mean, that wasn't
Mm.
my deal. And now that's what so many people have become, unfortunately.
What is your take on doctors today? Do you think that they're open to understanding, to making the shift, to more understanding about like nutrition and metabolic intervention and reversals and things like that? I mean, sometimes I get the impression that doctors do have this godlike complex and that they're very ego driven, but you're more in that world. So what is your impression?
There are certainly a lot of physicians that are. I mean, clearly. I mean, I see them every day. I
Mhm,
mean, I get physicians all the time sometimes it takes a personal experience. Like for me, I would have never gone down this route had I not taken a personal interest in my own nutrition as I got
mhm,
a little bit older, as I got in my 40s and started to realize, hey, I don't feel as good as I should. Let me look into nutrition. So many physicians have to experience it themselves first. And in fact, most of the physicians that are on board with what I'm selling, so to speak, with regard to low carb, ketogenic, carnivore diets,
mhm.
have all done it themselves and have seen it firsthand, experienced it firsthand, and then they start seeing it within their patients when they can get their patients to do it. Um, when I went to medical school, I remember as a, I don't know, was it a third year medical student, second year medical student? We, I remember the first time the drug company brought us all free pizza and gave us pens. We're like, oh, wow, we're cool. We finally made it. We got people that actually are kind of sucking up to us a little bit. Right. But and that's what it is. I mean, most of my medical education was developed for, paid for by pharmaceutical companies. My entire surgical training, it was a lot of that stuff. Equipment representatives taking you out to eat, hooking you up,
Hmm.
blowing smoke up your butt, all that stuff. And then all the continuing medical education, almost all of it or most of it, again, pharmaceutical companies kind of run
Wow.
that show. So it's just
Interesting.
the allopathic medical system is so entwined. They're married to pharmaceutical companies, and so extracting that is going to be extremely challenging. And again, I'll just put a plug in for our company, Rivero. We've gotten away from that to where our mission is treat the root cause. Um, you know, deprescribe whenever you can, because I think
Hmm.
like you said, it's not a drug deficiency. You're not suffering from an SSRI deficiency or a lithium deficiency or a metformin deficiency. You are probably being undernourished or malnourished or quite frankly poisoned by some of the food we have in our food supply.
Yeah, it's interesting. And in terms of nutrition, how much do doctors know? How much training do they have in nutrition, if
Well, I
any?
would say, we have a little bit more than the average lay person, because it's touched upon in the context of maybe like deficiency states, like when I was training, we learned about pellagra and beriberi and rickets and all these deficiency states, and a little bit how the body works and how energy is metabolized, and how vitamins work and how they're synthesized and things of that nature. But as far as saying this condition can be treated with this nutritional intervention, zero. There's zero about that. In fact,
Mhm.
most of us learn through just the grapevine that nutrition doesn't really matter, doesn't work, and the reality is, because for so long, and I see this, and it's kind of sad when I hear this, because physicians will say, well, we don't need all these Ozempic drugs, right? Because it's diet, it's lifestyle, it's exercise. And then physicians say, well, we already tried that in the 90s and it didn't work, and therefore nutrition doesn't work. What did you try? Well, we told everybody to eat cardboard and salad and lentils and low fat, and it didn't work, and therefore nutrition doesn't work, right?
Cardboard.
Yeah, well, essentially, just eat a bunch of
Yeah.
cardboard, flavorless cardboard.
Rice
Good luck with
cakes.
that. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I remember eating those stupid rice cakes. Those are, and
I did
you
too, I
think you're
did
doing
too.
something so healthy, and it's like, man,
I
this is like eating
Yeah,
sandpaper in a way.
and then it always hurt my stomach, and I just it's like the things you tell yourself,
Yeah.
thinking that you're being healthy. It really is. And speaking of food, you also mentioned, on your little rant that you did, the ingredients in the food. And obviously, I mean, single ingredient foods are best. But if you're going to have something that is mixed up, packaged, things like that. What would you look for? What would you like to see changed in that regard? For example, if somebody's going to buy potato chips, which isn't altogether a horrible thing, but it's been made horrible. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time trying to sell healthy potatoes. I don't know if they exist, but I mean, I guess you'd want something that potatoes, maybe salt, and maybe some, you know, I guess tallow or something like that, as a oil, which is often associated with those potato chips. And the point I was making is, obviously, and other people have made this, obviously, you're talking about the fact that we have thousands of foods that are sold in the United States, which are banned literally across the world. Why is that? And if you look
yeah.
at the data, which would have made something banned in the EU, we should at least look at that data and say, why did they ban it? And is there a valid concern here? And if it is, maybe we should pull it off
Hmm.
the Americans. I mean, we have this concept called generally recognized as safe. And so we've had literally thousands of novel ingredients introduced to our food supply over the last couple of decades. And they get this generally recognized as safe designation, or GRAS, GRAS. And it's like, well, how is that determined?
Oh.
Well, it's basically they might feed it to some rats for a little while, see if the rats die. And if they don't get real sick or die, they say, yeah, it's probably okay for human consumption. And then it gets on the market. And it's a lot of times it's the honor system. It's the saying that the company has done the requisite testing, and they've said it's safe, and therefore we'll put it on the market. And if it doesn't make you sick acutely, but it gives you an autoimmune disease 5 years later, you're never going to pick that up. And like I said, do we need new
Mhm.
ingredient? Do we need to invent new foods at this point? I mean, I would
Mhm.
argue that there is already in existence enough types of food for a human species to live and thrive and be healthy. We don't need to invent
Mhm.
any food. In fact, we probably need to take away a lot of foods, quite honestly.
Right.
That
Right.
would be probably better. I mean, things like, carrageenan, which is in all the dairy products and all the it's a thickener,
What
and
is that?
it's basically a stabilize I think it's a stabilizing agent or a thickening
Yeah.
agent that just plays with the texture of food. And it's put
Okay.
I
Okay.
often see it in the context of, like, you go to get ice cream or heavy cream or something like that. You look up, you
Mm.
turn it back around, and you'd expect to see what ingredients should you expect to see in a bottle of heavy cream? It should be
Cream.
cream and nothing else, right? But you look in there and
Yeah.
there's guar gum, there's polysorbate 80,
Right.
there's, carrageenan. I said, "Why the hell is that in there?" And the reason it's in there
Mhm.
because it helps it to stay homogeneous and might gives it a little better of a shelf life, uh, you know, time frame,
Okay.
which again, it's more profitable for them to do so, because if they can keep it on the
Mm.
shelf longer, it won't go bad, and they don't lose it. I think we gotta get
Yeah.
back into the habit of, of just eating food as we consume it. You might have to go to the store a little more often. I mean, I
Mhm.
guess these days with all the DoorDash stuff, which I hate. I hate the DoorDashes and the Uber Eats because I think the way it's used, if you're an old lady that can't walk, yeah, okay, fine. But for the most part, people just, they sit in their house or watching a movie and they're like, man, I'd really like some junk food. And somebody delivers it to their house. It's just, such a devolution of a species. Before, at one point
Mhm.
in our life, in our life as a human, we had to actually acquire food. We had to hunt things, kill
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
grow things, harvest things, and now you literally swipe your phone. The only ability you need in society is to be able to swipe your phone. And that that goes to what's coming. Elon Musk is talking about his Optimus Prime robots, where we're all going to have 3 or 4 robots in our house in the period of the next 20, 30 years. And we're not going to do anything. We're just going to sit there. The robot's going to do the dishes and do the laundry and make the beds and vacuum the house and drive to the store for us. And what do we do? Sit around
I
and turn into Wally people? I don't know.
That can't end well. I think people need to be gravitating more toward problem solving and critical thinking and that type of thing. And I when we talk about the food and all the ingredients, I remember hearing Callie Means talk about it was I think his interview that he did with Tucker Carlson when he was talking about his transition or his lobbying for big food. And he talked about the transition that when big tobacco was essentially shut down because of the addictive properties and all the lawsuits they went through, they transitioned into big food. And a lot of people don't know this. It was very eye-opening for me, and I thought I knew a lot about the industry, but they just transitioned their focus to big food to creating addictive flavorings and additives to the foods. And so, for example, that bag of potato chips that somebody buys that has 27 ingredients, a lot of the ingredients there are specifically formulated to create an addictive behavior. And so when you see these commercials where it says, "I bet you can't eat just one," that is a predictive programming that is going along with the science behind um, the addictive nature of the product itself, which I think is fascinating. But I
Yeah.
think you're right. Like single ingredient foods is where it's at, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can combine them yourself. The definition of ultra processed food is typically considered 5 or more ingredients, including foods that you don't normally find in your kitchen. I don't know about you, but I don't have and diglycerides in my kitchen. I just don't have that. You
I
might
don't
have some
have that.
flour and some sugar and some
Yeah.
whatever, bananas and things like that. In my house, it's mostly meat and, eggs for the most part. But the
Mm,
average person doesn't have that stuff. And it goes
yeah.
back, you mentioned there's a guy named, I think his name was William Moskowitz. I know his last name was Moskowitz. It might have been William. And he came up with the bliss point, which was this magic combination of salt and sugar and fat and mix it together. And that was the perfect amount to drive
Mhm.
this, uncontrollable appetite. And to the point, I had a woman that was working for one of these food companies as a chemist, and her job literally was to design food to be as addictive as possible. She had all this guilt. She wanted to come work for our company. She's like, I just want to come work for you guys because I feel so bad about what I've done over the course of my career. Yeah, so I mean,
Interesting.
it's like I said, was it RG Reynolds? I think bought Nabisco, and yeah, the tobacco companies bought the food companies. And the nice thing about food is you can't ban food. I mean, we all have to eat. You could ban smoking theoretically, I suppose, and they have in a lot of places. You can't smoke inside restaurants and planes. Thankfully, I remember when I was a kid flying long flights, international flights as a kid, and people were smoking cigarettes. It was like, oh my gosh. I remember sitting there as like an 8-year-old kid with my eyes burning red with all these people smoking their cigarettes. It used to drive me crazy. But we all have to eat, so we
Mhm.
can't ban food. And then it gets into this fight about, and the problem, a lot of people will say, well, if we're going to start describing or prescribing what foods you're allowed to eat or not eat, or what we're going to tax, and they're going to say, well, what are they going to tax? Are they going to start taxing beef, which I would have a huge problem with? So in my view, it's like,
Yeah.
let it alone. Let's educate people. Let's really do some studies, some real studies on this, and see what happens. Like I said, I would love to see studies on carnivore diets versus all these different diseases. And they're getting done, but slowly. But I'd like to see some real
Mhm.
resources
Mhm.
poured into that. That would be very enlightening.
Do you think, and we're getting into maybe some conspiracy territory. Do you think that there is a kind of a conspiracy against a meat-based diet? I mean, with all of the like eggs, all of the chickens being killed, the chickens themselves aren't being killed, but like you can't the egg-laying chickens are being killed. Even it's like there's a bird flu, but the chickens and the turkeys are still alive, but the egg-laying chickens are being killed. Like it's not logical, right? And then all the birds that are flying around are still alive. Things like that. Like, do you think that there is a concerted I won't say conspiracy, that like a concerted effort to move people away from consuming animal-based diet in this
Oh,
country?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's a huge push in the U.S., in Europe especially, to get people onto these more plant-based diets. There's huge organizations that spend millions and millions of dollars to make this happen. They lobby. There's activist scientists that are doing. There's a guy named Marco Springman at Oxford University. He keeps putting out this propaganda science. There are companies that want this to happen because alternative protein, they're anticipating it's a 200-300 billion-dollar a year industry. So yeah, there's people that want to do that. Now, the fact that they're culling chickens and not shooting all the, I mean, it's easier to cull a bunch of chickens that live in a big barn versus chasing geese around. So I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily part of that. I think
Yeah.
because back, I can't remember, it was not, it was quite a while ago, but it was in recent memory. At one point, something like 1/3 of the world's cattle population was infected with some kind of respiratory virus. It almost wiped out all the cows in Asia at one point, and so they had to do something to stop that. And so they ended up killing a lot of cows and so on and so forth. But so I think some of that is maybe, I don't think it's conspiracy. They're trying to kill all the chickens so no one can eat eggs. I don't think that's going on, but I do think there is an underlying push um, to get people away from animal foods. Now, fortunately, there's a guy named Julian Mellonton who works within the food industry and does a lot of the, supermarket trends, and he's very plugged into that. For the first time ever, and this is the first time ever since they've been doing these surveys in the UK, people are saying they're intentionally wanting to eat more red meat. Every year before that, it's been, I'm constantly trying to cut back on meat, cut back on meat. For the first time, that trend has reversed. People are saying, I want to eat more red meat. And the reason they're giving is for health reasons. So all the efforts of me yapping about carnivore diets and meat and all the other people out there
Mhm.
doing it is having an impact. People
Yeah,
are starting to realize and are
it's
starting to
great.
wake up from this. So I'm hopeful that because at some point, when everybody has this, mass formation psychosis or, you know, population wise brainwashing, that message, you can move people away. But
Mhm.
I think that's that's reversing, fortunately.
Yes, yes. This is exciting. Believe it or not, we are coming up on time here, and this has been such a fascinating conversation. We've had so many people involved in the chat. We are not set up to do a Q&A today. Maybe we will do that from time to time. But if you do have questions, I encourage you to contact Dr. Baker through his website, rivero.com. You can also go to our friends at officialsynapse.com. It's official synapse.com. They will give you a free discovery call if you want to check them out. Both are offering telemedicine. Also, Synapse does offer in person if you're in the Minnesota area. So you can contact both of those. Dr. Baker, I don't have a QR code for you, but I'll make one for next time. But it's his website is rivero.com, revero.com. The other thing I wanted to tell everybody is that if you are enjoying today's show and you would like to be notified of the next show, please go to my website, marygracemedia.com. I have the code up here on the screen, marygracemedia.com. Join the mailing list, and we will send out a notice before our next show. And you can jump on that mailing list. We'll get the word out to you. The other thing I wanted to let everybody know is if you're liking what you're seeing today, please let us know in the chat. But also, if there's something that you want to see covered in this area of healthcare, of wellness in the US and abroad, go ahead and send me an email, info@marygracemedia.com. And we will put that on the list and we'll throw that out into the next conversation. It's been a wonderful conversation today. I'm so delighted to be able to have this time with you, Dr. Baker. Is there any last words that you want to throw out to our listeners today?
Yeah, this is a new thing for me. So like I said, like Mary said, if you enjoyed this format, let us know and we'll make some more of these happen. Of course, if you are looking to improve your health and you need some help, you need someone to actually take care of your the root cause of your problem, not just medicate you, go check out rivero.com. We are there. We got physicians all across the country that get it. They get it. And it's a real change. It's the way we need to change healthcare.
And I'm putting that link in the chat here for everybody to go to. And I'm Mary Grace, and I am one of the biggest fans of MyPillow because they have quality America First products that are just made right here in the country, and they last. We have the towels, and I have a big issue with towels that shrink up after the first washing. The MyPillow towels stay color fast, they stay in shape, and they stay that way for years after repeated washings. You can't ask for better. Plus, they actually work. When somebody buys from MyPillow using the promo code Mary Grace, that does a couple of things. It brings in a little bit of an affiliate commission to our company, and it helps us to pay the bills, keep the lights on, keep the internet going, travel to places that we do to give you remote content. And it also helps MyPillow by giving them the support of people who genuinely value quality and companies that support real people right here in the United States and employ people all over this country and give back to this country. Go directly to mypillow.com, use promo code Mary Grace, and buy everything you need for the home. There's no need to spend time shopping anywhere else. Go to mypillow.com, use promo code Mary Grace, get your towels, pillows, sheets, robes, dog beds, pet beds, cat beds, whatever it is that you want for the home. Go to mypillow.com, promo code Mary Grace. It's easy. Don't waste your time anywhere else. mypillow.com, promo code Mary Grace. Thank you. Americans spend more now than ever on healthcare, and we're sicker than almost anybody in the world. We've put our trust in a system that's completely let us down. Dr. Troy Sproul and the team at Synapse Center for Health and Healing have changed all that. They are a functional medicine clinic, and they get to the root cause of what's made you sick in the first place. Once they do that, they give you solutions to help you get out of that. This is the way that medicine was meant to be practiced, and this is what they're doing. They're changing the entire system from the inside out, one person at a time, And you could be one of those people. And so when you're working with the team at Synapse, they're giving you solutions and not just prescriptions. That's a game changer for me. When you set up a free discovery call with Synapse, you're starting on a journey of healing. You're starting on a journey of getting answers. And that's why I've partnered with them, because I want you to be healthy. I want your family to be healthy. I want you to have all of the resources that you need to steward the body and the health that God's given you. Go to officialsynapse.com and tell them Mary Grace sent you. That's Official Synapse, synapse.com.
Hello, I'm Jordan, and this is my brother.
And I'm Nace, and we're at the Grid Down Chowdown, and this is Larry, who is a local rancher that we've partnered with.
Now, Larry, you've been ranching for over 4 generations, is that correct?
That's correct. I'm 3rd generation, my son's 4th generation, and I've got some grandkids that are 5th generation.
Man, that's awesome.
We've been here for quite a while, yeah.
All right, now, Larry, your cattle is grass-fed, grass-finished, and pasture-raised, just like God intended them to be.
Yes, because I want to know what's in that animal,
Right.
what it's been fed, and so the only way to do that is for us to keep it all natural, just like God has done it for years and years and years, thousands of years.
How has partnering up with us helped you and your ranch?
Well, it's allowed us to develop a market that we didn't have before, one that can get directly to the consumer, and that's great.
And just remember, more importantly, with every package that you buy, we put a salvation track in there. So from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for allowing us to do what we believe that God has us here to do. And just remember, God loves you. He really does.
Amen.
Go to griddownchowdown.com and use promo code Mary Grace.